The elevator doors were closing when a hand shot between them and forced them open again. I stepped back instinctively, my heart jumping before I even saw who it was. It was only Marco from accounting, breathless and apologetic, clutching a folder to his chest. I let out a small laugh at my own nerves and pressed the button for the 20th floor. That was the first sign. I did not know it then, but my body already understood something my mind had not caught up to yet. Something was wrong that day, even before anything happened. My name is Nadia Bellwether, and for 3 years I have worked as the personal assistant to Dante Calloway, a man whose name alone could silence a room. I do not say that to be dramatic. I say it because it is true. People lower their voices when he walks past. People stand a little straighter. And I am the one who manages his calendar, his contracts, his coffee order, and increasingly, his temper. I am not the kind of woman people expect to see beside a man like Dante. I am full-figured, with curves I stopped apologizing for years ago, and I wear glasses that I refuse to trade for contacts because they make it easier to read fine print at midnight. I have been underestimated my entire life. In school, in every job before this one, and especially here, in this glass tower full of people who assume that competence comes with a certain body type. They are wrong. I am the reason half of this company runs on time. That morning began like any other. I arrived at 7, an hour before anyone else, because I like the quiet. I like having the office to myself, the hum of the building settling into its rhythm, the light coming up slow over the city skyline. I made myself tea and sat down at my desk outside Dante's office, and I began sorting through the emails that had come in overnight. There were the usual messages. Vendors asking about invoices, a calendar request from a board member, a cryptic note from Dante's head of security, a quiet man named Elliot Grant, asking me to confirm the exact time Dante would be leaving the building that evening. I did not think much of it. Elliot always asked questions like that. He was thorough to the point of being tiresome, and I had learned to answer him without complaint. By 9, the office was full. Phones rang, printers hummed, someone spilled coffee near the break room, and I heard Priya from marketing laughing about it 2 floors down through the thin walls. It was, in every visible way, an ordinary day. Dante arrived at 9:15, as he always did, wearing a dark gray suit that looked like it had been sewn directly onto him. He nodded at me the way he always does, a small acknowledgement that somehow makes me feel seen and invisible at the same time. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I answered, already handing him the folder with his schedule for the day. Board call at 10, lunch with the Hartley group at noon, then the site visit at 4. He took the folder without looking at it, because he trusted that I had already read it twice and caught anything that needed catching. That trust is not something Dante gives easily. It took me over a year to earn it, and I have spent every day since making sure I never lose it. "Anything strange?" he asked, the way he always does. It is not really a question. It is a habit, a small ritual between us. "Elliot wants to know your exact departure time tonight," I said. He didn't say why. Dante paused for half a second. It was so brief that most people would have missed it, but I have spent 3 years learning the language of his silences, and that pause meant something. "Tell him 7, he said finally, and walked into his office without another word. I sat back down and stared at my screen, but I did not immediately return to my emails. Something about that pause sat wrong with me. Dante does not hesitate. He decides things the way other people breathe, without thought, without effort. A pause from him was as loud as a shout from anyone else. I pushed the feeling aside, because that is what I do. I am not paid to have feelings about my employer's silences. I am paid to keep his empire running, while he handles the parts of it that I am not meant to ask about. I have always understood, in the vague way one understands the shape of something, without seeing its edges, that Dante's business involves more than the shipping contracts and property holdings listed on paper. I have seen the men who visit his office and never sign anything. I have heard the names spoken in hallways that stop the moment I walk by. I have chosen not to ask questions, because some doors are better left closed, and because Dante has never given me a reason to fear him. The morning moved quickly after that. The board call ran long, as it always does. and I spent it fielding calls from 3 different departments who each believed their crisis was the most urgent. By the time Dante left for his lunch with the Hartley group, I had rescheduled 2 meetings, resolved a shipping dispute, and eaten half a sandwich at my desk between phone calls. Around 2 in the afternoon, Priya stopped by my desk with a paper cup of coffee she had bought for me, without asking, which she does more often than she needs to. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, setting the cup down. "I haven't, not really," I admitted. "Elliot has been sending strange messages all morning." "Strange how?" she asked, leaning against the edge of my desk. "Just careful. More careful than usual," I said, and even as I said it, I heard how vague it sounded. I didn't have anything solid to point to. Just a feeling, and feelings are not the kind of thing you can put in a report. Priya shrugged and told me to drink my coffee before it went cold, and then she was gone, back to her own desk, back to her own version of a normal day. I envied her for a moment. She worked for a man in finance who cared about spreadsheets and quarterly targets. Her biggest worry that day was probably whether the printer on the 4th floor would jam again. My afternoon continued much the same way. Emails, calls, a brief meeting with Dante about the site visit, during which he seemed distracted, in a way I had rarely seen. He kept glancing toward the window, toward the street below, as though he expected to see something there. "Is everything all right?" I asked him, because even though it was not my place, I could not stop myself. He looked at me for a moment longer than usual. "Fine," he said. "Just business." I did not push further. I never do. That is part of what makes me good at my job. I know which questions to ask and which ones to let go. At 4, Dante left for the site visit with Elliot and 2 other men. I recognized but did not know by name. The office grew quieter in his absence, the way it always does when he leaves, as though the whole floor exhales at once. I used the time to catch up on the tasks that had piled up during the morning's chaos, filing reports, confirming tomorrow's meetings, drafting a letter Dante would need to sign first thing in the morning. By 6:30, most of the office had emptied. I could hear the cleaning staff beginning their rounds on the floor below, the distant hum of vacuum cleaners rising through the stairwell. I packed my bag slowly, in no particular hurry, because I had nowhere urgent to be. My apartment would be quiet and empty, waiting for me the way it always did. I checked my phone before I left. A message from Elliot confirmed that Dante had returned safely from the site visit and would be leaving the building at 7, exactly as planned. I felt a small measure of relief at that, though I could not have explained why I needed it. I took the elevator down to the parking garage at 6:50, my heels echoing against the polished floor of the lobby. The security guard at the front desk, a kind older man named Harold, waved at me as I passed. "Careful out there tonight," he said, not looking up from his newspaper. "Storm's coming in." I glanced out the glass doors at the darkening sky and nodded. I did not think, in that moment, that he might be talking about something other than the weather. The parking garage beneath the building was nearly empty by that hour, most employees having left hours earlier. My car sat in its usual spot on the 2nd level, a modest sedan, tucked between 2 pillars near the elevator bank. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. I have walked through that garage hundreds of times, at every hour of the day, and it had never once felt unsafe. That night, it did. I noticed it the moment the elevator doors opened, a stillness that did not belong there. The garage should have carried the distant sound of the city above, cars on the street, the hum of the building's ventilation system. Instead, there was only silence, thick and pressing, the kind that makes the hair on your arms rise before your mind understands why. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was tired, that the strange energy of the day had gotten into my head, that Elliot's careful messages and Dante's distracted glances had made me jumpy for no good reason. I walked toward my car with my keys already in my hand, the way I always do, the metal cool against my palm. I was halfway across the garage when I heard the footsteps behind me. They were not the footsteps of someone leaving work. They were too deliberate, too even, matching my pace exactly, as though whoever it was did not want me to notice them, and yet was not skilled enough to hide it completely. I quickened my step without turning around. my pulse suddenly loud in my own ears. The footsteps quickened too. I reached for my phone in my bag, my fingers fumbling against the fabric, and that was when a second set of footsteps emerged from the shadows near the far pillar, cutting off the path toward my car. I stopped walking, my breath caught in my throat. Two men stood between me and the elevator behind me, and one man stood ahead, blocking the way to my car. All three of them were watching me with the calm, patient expressions of people who had done this before, who were not afraid of anything I might do. I understood, in that instant, that whatever strange feeling had followed me through the entire day had finally found its shape. I was not going to make it to my car. The man ahead of me smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who already believed the outcome of this moment was settled. "Miss Bellwether," he said, my name sounding wrong in his mouth, too familiar, too rehearsed. "We only want to talk." People who only want to talk do not corner someone in an empty garage with three of them and one of me. I knew that much without needing to be told. My mind raced through everything I had ever read or heard about situations like this, every scrap of advice that suddenly felt useless against the reality of concrete pillars and dim fluorescent light. I kept my voice steady, though my hands were shaking at my sides. "I don't know what you want, but I think you have the wrong person." The man tilted his head, studying me the way someone studies a puzzle they already know the answer to. "We don't think we do. You work for Dante Calloway, you manage his schedule, you know where he is every hour of every day." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This was not about me. It had never been about me. I was simply the door they believed would open easiest. "I'm just his assistant," I said. "I don't know anything about his private business." The man behind me laughed, low and unimpressed. "That's not what we heard. We heard you know everything, every meeting, every property, every name he doesn't want written down." I took a step back without meaning to, and my shoulder collided with something solid. I turned my head slightly, and realized it was one of the other men, close enough now that I could see the flat, businesslike look in his eyes. There was no anger there, no excitement, just the quiet efficiency of someone doing a job they had done many times before, and that terrified me more than shouting ever could have. "I need you to listen carefully," the first man said, stepping closer. He kept a folded phone in one hand, tapping it lightly against his palm. "We are going to send Dante a message tonight, and we need you to help us send it. If you cooperate, this ends easily. If you don't, it ends differently." My throat tightened. I thought of every training video the company had ever forced us to sit through, the ones about workplace safety that felt so distant and theoretical until this exact moment. None of it had prepared me for the specific, suffocating fear of being surrounded in a place I had once considered ordinary. "I don't have access to anything that would help you," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "I schedule meetings. I answer emails. That's all." The man's smile thinned. "That's a shame, because we were hoping you'd make this simple." I glanced past him toward the elevator, calculating distance, calculating speed, knowing even as I did it that the numbers did not favor me. 3 of them. One of me. No weapon, no plan, only the desperate, animal instinct to survive whatever was about to happen. I decided, in that moment, that if I could not fight my way out, I would talk my way through it instead. Talking was the one thing I had always been good at. It was the skill that had carried me through every underestimation, every dismissive glance, every room that assumed I had nothing useful to offer. "You said you wanted to send a message," I said, keeping my eyes on the leader. "What message?" "If I understand what you need, maybe I can actually help you get it, instead of standing here while you waste time threatening someone who genuinely doesn't know anything." It was a gamble. I did not know if it would buy me seconds or minutes or nothing at all, but it was the only tool I had. The man studied me for a long moment, and I watched something shift behind his eyes, a flicker of reconsideration. In that pause, I studied him back, cataloging everything I could. The way his shoes were polished but worn at the heel, as though he spent long hours on his feet. The faint tremor in his left hand, quickly stilled, that told me he was not as calm as he wanted to appear. The way his eyes kept flicking toward the elevator, checking, watching, as though he too was afraid of being interrupted. Fear, I realized slowly, was not something only I carried in that garage. He was afraid of failing, of returning to whoever had sent him, without the result they wanted. That thought did something strange to me. It steadied me, just slightly, because a frightened man is a man who can be managed, even if only for a little while longer. "Smart," he said finally. "I like that. Most people just cry." "I don't have the luxury of crying right now," I said, and it was truer than he could have known. He stepped closer still, close enough that I could smell the sharp scent of his cologne, could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow. "Here's the message. Tell Dante that the Kessler family remembers what he took from them. Tell him the North Docks were never his to claim. Tell him this is the first warning, and the next one won't involve talking." The Kessler family. The name meant nothing to me directly, but I filed it away with the sharp focus of someone whose survival might depend on remembering every detail correctly. North Docks. First warning. "I can tell him that," I said, "but he won't believe a message delivered through his assistant. He'll want to know exactly who told me." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, as though he had not expected me to think that far ahead. He was quiet for a moment, considering. "That's not your concern," he said finally, the patience in his voice thinning at the edges. "Your concern is making sure the message gets delivered exactly as I gave it to you." I nodded slowly, buying seconds, always buying seconds, because somewhere in the back of my mind I clung to the hope that seconds could turn into minutes, and minutes could turn into rescue. I did not know where that hope came from. I only knew I needed it to survive the next few moments. The man behind me shifted his weight, and I felt the change in the air before I understood it. "Enough talking," he said. "We're behind schedule." The leader held up a hand, silencing him without even looking his way. "Patience. She's cooperating." "I don't think she needs to be alive to deliver a message," the second man said, and the words landed in my chest like a physical blow. I felt my knees threaten to give beneath me, felt the concrete floor tilt slightly, though I forced myself to stay upright, to keep my eyes on the leader, to keep talking, because the moment I stopped talking, I stopped mattering to them. "She delivers it better alive," the leader said, though his tone had shifted, grown colder, more clinical. "Grab her. We're taking this somewhere quieter." The word taking hit me harder than any threat had. I understood, with sudden and horrifying clarity, that whatever was about to happen would not happen here, in this garage, where at least there was a small chance of someone stumbling upon us. It would happen somewhere else, somewhere I would have no control over, somewhere the ending would be entirely theirs to decide. I did the only thing I could think to do. I screamed. It was not a calculated decision. It was pure instinct, raw and unthinking, the kind of sound that comes from somewhere beneath conscious thought. The scream tore through the silence of the garage, bouncing off concrete and steel, and for half a second, I saw genuine surprise flicker across the leader's face, as though he had not expected someone he considered so easily controlled to fight back at all. A hand clamped over my mouth before the sound had even finished echoing, rough and hard against my lips, and I bit down instinctively, tasting blood, hearing a sharp curse from the man behind me. His grip loosened for just a moment, and I twisted away, stumbling backward, my heels scraping against the concrete. "Hold her," the leader snapped, all patience gone from his voice now, replaced by something sharper, more urgent. I ran. I did not think about direction or strategy. I simply ran, deeper into the garage, away from the elevator, away from my car, away from anything familiar, because the only thing that mattered was putting distance between myself and the hands that had grabbed at me. My heels betrayed me almost immediately, catching against a crack in the concrete, sending me stumbling into the side of a parked car. Pain shot through my hip, but I pushed off the metal and kept moving, kept running, my breath tearing in and out of my lungs. My mind flew through the layout of the garage as I ran, every memory of walking to my car over 3 years, suddenly critical, suddenly the only map I had. I knew there was a stairwell somewhere on this level, tucked behind the maintenance room, though I could not remember exactly how far, and I knew that if I could reach it, I might be able to lose them in the winding concrete steps before they caught up. I could hear them behind me now, no longer bothering to hide their footsteps, no longer pretending this was anything other than what it was. I turned a corner between two pillars, my lungs burning, my vision narrowing to the small patch of concrete ahead of me, and found myself facing a dead end. A concrete wall rising up where I had hoped to find another path, another way out. I spun around, pressing my back against the cold concrete, my chest heaving, and watched as all three men rounded the corner behind me, spreading out slowly, cutting off any possibility of escape. The leader's expression had lost all traces of the patient, almost polite man from moments before. In its place was something flat and dangerous, the look of someone who had decided the easy path was no longer available and was now prepared for the harder one. "That was a mistake," he said, his voice quiet in a way that felt far more threatening than shouting would have. I pressed myself harder against the wall, as though I could somehow disappear into it, as though the concrete might open and swallow me whole, rather than let whatever was coming reach me. My mind raced through every possibility and found none of them favorable. There was no door behind me, no window, no path around the men who now stood only a few steps away, close enough that I could see the tension coiled in their shoulders, the readiness in their stance. One of the men reached into his jacket, and I saw the dull glint of metal catch the fluorescent light above us. My whole body went cold, every instinct screaming at me to move, to run, to do something, anything, even as my legs refused to obey, frozen against the wall as though my body had already accepted what my mind was still refusing to believe. "This is your last chance to cooperate quietly," the leader said, though the words no longer carried any real offer of mercy within them. They were simply a formality now, a final gesture before whatever came next. I opened my mouth, though I did not know what words I meant to say, because I understood, in that moment, with a clarity sharper than anything I had ever felt, that there was nothing I could say that would change what was about to happen. And then, from somewhere behind them, I heard the sound of a car engine roaring to life, tires screeching against concrete, and headlights suddenly flooded the narrow space between the pillars, throwing every shadow into sharp. The men turned, startled, weapons rising instinctively toward the new threat, and for one suspended moment, nobody moved at all. A car door opened, and I heard a voice I knew better than my own, low and controlled, carrying a fury I had never once heard from him in 3 years of working by his side. "Step away from her," Dante said, "right now." Everything after that happened too fast for me to fully understand in the moment. It was only later, replaying it again and again in my mind, that I managed to piece the sequence together the way it truly occurred. Dante moved before the men could fully turn their weapons toward him. He crossed the distance between the car and the pillars in a handful of strides, and there was nothing hesitant in the way he moved, nothing that resembled the calm, measured executive I had watched sign contracts and take phone calls for 3 years. This was a different man entirely, one whose existence I had always suspected but never witnessed. The first man, the one with the tremor in his hand, barely had time to raise his weapon before Dante closed the gap and drove his forearm into the man's wrist, sending the weapon clattering uselessly across the concrete floor. The man staggered back, more from shock than force, and Dante did not give him a chance to recover. A single, controlled strike sent him crumpling against the nearest pillar, sliding down to the floor in a stunned heap. The second man lunged toward Dante from the side, and for a moment my heart stopped entirely, certain I was about to watch something happen that I would never be able to unsee. But Dante had already anticipated the movement, sidestepping with an economy of motion that felt almost unnatural, redirecting the man's momentum into the concrete wall beside us. The impact echoed through the garage, sharp and final, and the man did not get up again. The leader, the one who had spoken to me with that terrible patient smile, backed away instead of advancing, his eyes flicking between Dante and the 2 men now sprawled across the ground. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the same calculation I had watched him make with me only minutes before, except now, the numbers were no longer in his favor. "You don't understand what you're stepping into," the leader said, though his voice had lost the confidence it carried earlier. Dante's response was quiet, almost gentle in tone, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had shouted. "I understand exactly what I'm stepping into. The question is whether you understand what you just did." The leader's hand twitched toward his jacket, and Dante moved again, faster than I could track, closing the distance in an instant. Whatever the leader had intended to reach for never made it out of his jacket. Within seconds, he too was on the ground, and the garage fell into a silence so complete it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Dante stood over him for a moment, breathing steadily, showing no signs of exertion despite what had just happened. Then he turned toward me, and the fury in his expression dissolved into something else entirely, something raw and unguarded that I had never once seen from him in all our years working together. "Nadia," he said, and my name in his voice sounded different than it ever had before, stripped of its usual professional distance. I found that I could not speak. My legs, which had held me upright through everything that came before, finally gave way, and I slid down the wall behind me until I was sitting on the cold concrete floor, my whole body shaking with the release of adrenaline that had kept me standing until now. Dante was beside me in an instant, crouching down to my level, his hands hovering near my shoulders, as though he wanted to touch me, but was uncertain whether he had any right to. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning me with an intensity that made my skin feel warm despite the cold garage air. "Did they touch you? Did they hurt you anywhere?" I shook my head, though I was not entirely certain it was true. My hip ached from where I had collided with the parked car, and my lips stung faintly from where I had bitten down during the struggle, but none of it felt significant compared to the simple, overwhelming fact that I was still alive to feel it at all. "I'm okay," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm okay." Elliot's voice cut through the moment, sharp and urgent, as he came around the corner with two other men I recognized as part of Dante's security team. I don't know how he had gotten there so quickly, though later I would learn that Dante had never truly left the building that evening at all, that something about the day's strange tension had made him circle back, made him wait and watch, made him choose to follow me down to the garage himself, rather than trust the task to anyone else. "We need to move," Elliot said, his eyes sweeping across the three men on the ground, assessing threats with the same efficiency I had always admired in him. "This location is compromised. If there were 3 sent, there could be more watching." Dante did not look away from me. "Get them contained," he said to Elliot, his voice carrying an authority that required no raising in volume. "I want names before sunrise. I want to know exactly who sent them." Elliot nodded and began issuing quiet instructions to the other men, and within moments, the 3 attackers were being restrained and moved with a swift, practiced efficiency that told me this was not the first time Dante's people had handled a situation like this. Dante turned his full attention back to me, and I realized his hands had finally found my shoulders, steady and warm, despite everything that had just happened around us. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. "I think so," I said, though when I tried, my legs betrayed me again, trembling beneath my weight. Dante caught me before I could stumble, one arm sliding around my waist with a careful strength that felt entirely different from the violence I had just witnessed him deliver only moments before. "I'm sorry," I whispered, embarrassed by my own weakness, by the way my body seemed determined to fall apart now that the danger had passed. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice fierce in a way that startled me. "Don't you dare apologize for this. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault." He guided me toward his car, his arm never leaving my waist, and I found myself leaning into his support more than I intended to, grateful for a strength that had nothing to do with weapons or violence, and everything to do with simply being there, solid and present, in a night that had tried to take everything from me. The car ride that followed passed in a blur. I remember the heater running, the warmth slowly returning to my hands, the city lights blurring past the window, as Dante drove with one hand, while the other remained resting on the seat beside me, close enough that I could feel its warmth without either of us acknowledging why he had positioned it there. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice steadier now, though still quieter than usual. "Somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere they won't think to look tonight." I wanted to ask more questions. Who were they? What did they want? What had they meant by the Kessler family and the North Docks, and warnings that would not involve talking next time? But something in the set of his jaw told me this was not the moment for those questions, that he needed a little more time before he was ready to answer them honestly, and I found myself willing to give him that time, even with my mind racing through everything I had heard in that garage. We drove for nearly 40 minutes, leaving the city center behind, the buildings growing sparser, and the streets darker, as we moved into an area I did not recognize. Eventually, the car turned down a long private road, lined with tall trees, their branches meeting overhead to form a dark tunnel that opened, finally, onto a wide gated property. The gates opened automatically as we approached, and the car rolled up a long driveway toward a house that looked less like a home and more like a fortress, dressed in elegant stone and warm lighting. I had never known this place existed, had never once heard Dante mention it in 3 years of managing every corner of his visible life. "You have another house," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. "Very few people know about this place," he said, deparking the car and turning to look at me fully for the first time since we had left the garage. "That's exactly why I'm bringing you here tonight." Inside, the house was quiet and warm, furnished with a simplicity that felt at odds with the wealth evident in every detail, from the polished wood floors to the carefully chosen art on the walls. Dante led me to a sitting room near the back of the house, where a fire had already been lit, as though someone had known we were coming, even before we arrived. "Sit," he said gently, guiding me toward a deep armchair near the fireplace. "I'll get you something warm to drink." I sank into the chair, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. My hands were still trembling faintly, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold in whatever warmth I could find. The fire crackled softly, and for the first time since the elevator doors had opened onto that too-quiet garage, I felt something close to safe. Dante returned a few minutes later with 2 mugs of tea, setting one carefully into my hands before settling into the chair across from me. He watched me for a long moment before speaking, his expression carrying a weight I had never seen him carry before, not even during the tensest business negotiations I had witnessed him navigate over the years. "I need to explain some things to you," he said finally, "things I should have told you a long time ago." I wrapped my hands tighter around the warm mug, grateful for something solid to hold on to. "I think I'd like to hear them now," I said. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire, as though gathering the words from somewhere deep and difficult to reach. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the authority I had grown used to hearing from him. Instead, it carried something rawer, something closer to regret. "The business you know, the one on paper, the shipping contracts and property holdings, that's real," he said, "but it's only part of what I run. There's another side to my life, one I've spent years trying to keep separate from the world you belong to. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you outside of it." I set my mug down carefully on the small table beside the chair, my hands finally steady enough to trust with the movement. "And now?" I asked quietly. "What changed?" Dante's eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I had never expected to find there, not in 3 years of professional distance and careful boundaries. "Now they know your name," he said. "Now they know you matter to me, and that means nothing about tonight was random. It means I brought this into your life the moment I let myself care about you as more than an assistant." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than anything that had happened in the garage, because unlike the fear and the danger, this was something I had no practiced instinct for handling at all. I thought back over the last 3 years, searching for signs I might have missed, small moments that could have told me this was coming long before tonight. The way he always remembered how I took my coffee without ever asking twice. The way he had once canceled an entire afternoon of meetings simply because I mentioned I had a headache, claiming it was for scheduling reasons that never quite made sense. The way his eyes lingered sometimes, half a second longer than professional courtesy required, before he caught himself and looked away. I never let myself believe those moments meant anything, I admitted quietly. I told myself I was imagining things, that a man like you would never see someone like me that way. Dante set his own mug down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed entirely on me. "What way is that?" he asked, though something in his tone told me he already suspected my answer and wanted to hear it anyway. I gestured vaguely at myself, at the body I had spent years defending against the quiet judgments of a world that rarely made space for women who looked like me in rooms full of power and polish. "I'm not the kind of woman men like you are seen with," I said. "I've made peace with that a long time ago. It doesn't hurt the way it used to." Something shifted across Dante's face, an expression I had never seen him wear in any boardroom or negotiation, something closer to anger, though I understood almost immediately that the anger was not directed at me. "Whoever taught you to believe that was wrong," he said, his voice low but fierce, "and I include myself in that, because I let 3 years pass without telling you the truth, which meant I let you keep believing it a little longer than I should have." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing at all, watching the firelight flicker across his features, searching for any sign that this was some strange side effect of the danger we had both just survived, some temporary closeness that would fade once the adrenaline wore off, and the ordinary distance of employer and employee reasserted itself. But the longer I watched him, the more I understood that this was not adrenaline speaking. This was something that had been building quietly for a long time, hidden beneath careful professionalism and unspoken boundaries, waiting for a night like this one to finally force its way into the open. Elliot appeared in the doorway then, his expression grave, and Dante straightened immediately, some of the softness in his posture giving way to the sharper, more commanding presence I recognized from the office. "We have names," Elliot said. "All 3 of them work under a man called Victor Kessler. He runs a smaller operation out of the Eastern District, but he's been making noise for months about the North Dock contracts you took from his family 2 years ago." "I remember Victor Kessler," Dante said, his jaw tightening. "I remember his father even better. The old man never forgave losing those docks, and it seems his son inherited the grudge, along with everything else." "What do you want done?" Elliot asked. Dante glanced at me before answering, as though weighing how much of this conversation he wanted me to witness, and then seemed to decide, in that same instant, that he would not shield me from it any longer. "Find out who authorized tonight specifically," he said. "I want to know if this was Victor acting alone or if someone else gave the order. And I want eyes on Nadia around the clock until we understand exactly what we're dealing with." Elliot nodded and disappeared back down the hallway, leaving the 2 of us alone again in the firelit quiet of the room. I studied Dante's profile for a long moment, seeing him now not as the composed executive I had worked beside for 3 years, but as a man carrying the full weight of a world I had only ever glimpsed at its edges. "Are you going to tell me everything now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. "Or are you still deciding how much I can handle?" A faint, tired smile crossed his lips, the first genuine smile I had seen from him since the garage. "I think tonight already proved you can handle more than most people I know," he said. "So yes, I'll tell you everything you want to know." And for the next hour he did. He told me about the North Docks, about the rival family that had controlled them for decades before losing them in a deal gone wrong, that Dante had capitalized on without fully understanding the depth of resentment it would leave behind. He told me about Victor Kessler, a man younger than Dante, hungrier, more reckless, more willing to take risks his father never would have considered. He told me about the careful balance he had spent years maintaining between his legitimate business and the world beneath it, a balance that tonight had finally begun to crack. I listened to all of it without interruption, absorbing details I had spent 3 years politely pretending not to notice, and found that instead of fear, what settled over me was something closer to clarity. The pieces of a puzzle I had unconsciously assembled over years finally clicked into place, forming a complete picture of the man I had been working for, and somewhere along the way, falling for, without ever fully admitting it to myself. When he finally finished speaking, the fire had burned low, and the house around us had grown entirely silent, the kind of silence that comes only in the deepest hours of the night. "Why are you telling me all of this now?" I asked quietly. "You could have kept me in the dark, kept me safer that way." Dante shook his head slowly. "Keeping you in the dark is what nearly got you killed tonight," he said. "I thought protecting you meant keeping you separate from this side of my life. I understand now that it only meant you walked into danger without any of the information you needed to protect yourself." I considered his words carefully, turning them over in my mind alongside everything else the night had given me. "And what happens now?" I asked. "Now that I know." Dante rose from his chair and crossed the small distance between us, kneeling in front of where I sat so that our eyes were level with each other for the first time since we had arrived at the house. Now, he said quietly, you decide whether you want to keep working for a man like me, knowing everything that comes with it. And I decide whether I have the right to ask you to stay, knowing what it might cost you. The fire popped softly in the silence that followed, and I found myself studying his face in a way I had never allowed myself to before, no longer bound by the careful distance of employer and assistant, seeing instead simply a man, tired and honest and finally unguarded, waiting for my answer with something that looked remarkably like fear. I did not sleep that night, not really. I stayed in the guest room Dante led me to after our conversation by the fire, lying awake beneath unfamiliar blankets, staring at a ceiling I had never seen before, my mind circling endlessly through everything that had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the garage again, the weapon catching the light, the leader's cold, patient smile, and beneath that, quieter but no less persistent, I saw the way Dante had looked at me by the fire, kneeling in front of my chair, waiting for an answer I still had not given him. By the time the sun rose, painting the guest room in pale gold light, I had made a decision, though I was not yet certain it was the wise one. I found Dante in the kitchen downstairs, already dressed, already working through a stack of papers spread across the counter, a cup of coffee cooling forgotten beside him. He looked up when I entered, and something in his expression softened immediately, the sharp focus of business giving way to something gentler. You should still be sleeping, he said. I couldn't, I admitted, pulling out a stool at the counter and sitting across from him. Too much to think about. He set his papers aside, giving me his full attention in a way that still felt new and slightly overwhelming after 3 years of stolen glances and careful distance. Anything you want to talk through, he offered. I studied him for a long moment before speaking, choosing my words carefully, because what I wanted to say mattered too much to say carelessly. Last night, I said, you asked me if I wanted to keep working for you, knowing everything that comes with it. I've been thinking about that all night. And, he asked, his voice carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in his shoulders that betrayed how much my answer mattered to him. I don't think I want to just keep working for you, I said slowly. I think I want to understand this world you live in. Not from the outside, the way I have for 3 years, pretending not to notice things I clearly noticed anyway. I want to actually understand it, if that's something you're willing to let me do. Dante was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made the kitchen feel smaller than it was. That's not a small thing to ask for, he said finally. Understanding this world means accepting the danger that comes with it. Last night could happen again. Worse than last night could happen. I know, I said, and I found that I meant it completely, without the tremor of fear that had colored my voice hours earlier. I spent my whole life being underestimated because of how I look. Because people assume someone who looks like me couldn't possibly be capable, couldn't possibly handle difficult things. I'm tired of being protected from things I'm capable of facing. If I'm going to be part of your life in any real way, I want to be part of all of it, not just the parts that are comfortable. Something shifted in Dante's expression, admiration mixing with a worry he did not bother trying to hide. You're not like anyone else I've ever known, he said quietly. Good, I said, allowing myself a small smile for the first time since the garage. I'd hate to be ordinary. He returned my smile, though it faded quickly, as his thoughts turned back toward the more urgent matter at hand. Elliot has already started digging into Victor Kessler's operation, he said. We should know more by this afternoon about who exactly authorized last night's attack. As if summoned by his own name, Elliot appeared in the kitchen doorway moments later, his expression carrying the particular tension of someone bringing news that would not be welcome. We have a problem, he said, without preamble. Victor didn't act alone. Someone inside your organization gave him information about Nadia's schedule, her habits, the exact time she leaves the building most nights. That kind of detail doesn't come from outside surveillance. That comes from someone close to you. The kitchen fell silent, the warmth of the morning suddenly feeling distant and unreachable. I watched Dante's expression harden, watched the man I had begun to understand as capable of real gentleness give way once again to something colder, more calculating. Who? Dante asked, his voice dangerously quiet. We don't know yet, Elliot admitted, but the leak is recent. Whoever it is has access to Nadia's calendar, her routines, details that only a handful of people inside the company would know. I felt a chill move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the kitchen. I thought immediately of the people I worked alongside every day, the familiar faces I passed in hallways, shared coffee with, exchanged small kindnesses with over years of ordinary office life. The idea that one of them might have handed my safety to men willing to hurt me felt like a betrayal deeper than anything the strangers in the garage had attempted. That list isn't long, I said slowly, my mind already working through names, faces, patterns of behavior I might have overlooked. My calendar access is limited to people in senior operations, Elliot's team, and Dante's direct reports. That's maybe a dozen people total. I began listing them aloud, watching Dante's face for any flicker of recognition or suspicion as each name left my mouth. Most of them I trusted without question, people who had proven their loyalty through years of quiet, reliable work. A few gave me pause, not because I had any real reason to suspect them, but because I realized, uncomfortably, how little I actually knew about the private lives of the people I worked beside every day. We build entire relationships out of surface details, I said slowly, more to myself than to Dante. Coffee orders, weekend plans. We think that means we know someone. Dante's expression remained grim. In this world, the people closest to you are often the ones with the most opportunity to hurt you, he said. It's why I've always kept my circle small. Last night reminded me why that caution exists. Elliot nodded grimly. That matches what we're seeing. We need to narrow it down quickly, before whoever it is realizes we're looking, and either flees or tries something else. Dante's jaw tightened, his hands flattening against the counter as though bracing himself against the weight of the discovery. Pull the access logs, he said. Every login, every download, every time someone touched Nadia's schedule in the last month. I want a full report by tonight. Elliot nodded and disappeared again, leaving Dante and me alone once more in the quiet kitchen, though the warmth from earlier had been replaced by a tense, watchful stillness. I need you to stay here, Dante said, turning back toward me. At least until we know who we're dealing with. The house is secure. Nobody outside a very small circle knows this property exists. I wanted to argue, some instinct in me rebelling against the idea of being tucked away while decisions were made without me, but I recognized the wisdom in his caution, even as it frustrated me. I understand, I said, but I want to be kept informed, not shielded from information the way you shielded me before. If there's a traitor close to us, I might recognize something you and Elliot miss. I know these people. I've worked beside them for years. Dante considered this for a long moment, and I watched him weigh his instinct to protect me against the respect he clearly held for my judgment, a respect that had only deepened, not lessened, since last night. All right, he said finally. You'll be informed, every step. The rest of the day passed in a strange, suspended tension. Elliot's team worked through the access logs while Dante fielded a series of tense phone calls I was not privy to, his voice low and controlled behind the closed door of the study. I spent the hours pacing through the unfamiliar rooms of the house, trying to occupy my restless mind with anything other than the growing dread of wondering which familiar face might have betrayed me. By late afternoon, Elliot returned with a thin folder in hand, his expression grim in a way that told me the news inside was not going to be easy to hear. We found something, he said, setting the folder on the kitchen counter where Dante and I had gathered once again. Someone accessed Nadia's calendar remotely 3 times in the past 2 weeks, each time using credentials belonging to Priya Anand in marketing. The name hit me like a physical blow, and I felt my stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with disbelief. Priya, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. That's not possible. Priya brings me coffee. Priya asks about my weekend. She's my friend. Elliot's expression remained carefully neutral, the practiced neutrality of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. The access came from her credentials, he said. That doesn't necessarily mean she did it herself. Credentials can be stolen, borrowed, compromised in a dozen ways. I clung to that possibility with a desperation that surprised me, unwilling to accept that someone who had sat beside my desk, who had laughed with me over spilled coffee only yesterday morning, could have been quietly selling pieces of my life to men who wanted to hurt me. "We need to talk to her," Dante said, his voice carrying none of the warmth I had grown used to hearing, replaced instead by the cold precision I imagined he used in every difficult negotiation he had ever conducted. "Carefully. If she's innocent, we handle this delicately and find whoever actually compromised her access. If she's not, we need to know exactly what she gave them and who she's working with." "I want to be there," I said immediately, before Dante could suggest otherwise. "If Priya is somehow involved, I need to understand why. I need to hear it directly." Dante studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing the same instinct to protect me against the promise he had made only hours earlier to keep me informed, to treat me as someone capable of facing difficult things, rather than someone who needed shielding from them. "All right," he said finally. "But you stay close to me. If this goes wrong in any way, I need you where I can protect you immediately." I nodded, understanding the boundary he was drawing, respecting it, even as every instinct in me wanted to march directly into the truth, without hesitation. "Understood," I said. Elliot arranged for Priya to be brought to a private meeting room near the office, under the pretense of an urgent work matter, and by early evening, we were in a car once again, driving back toward the city I had left behind only hours earlier, though it felt as though an entire lifetime had passed since I had walked through that too-quiet garage. The drive was silent, tension coiled tightly in the small space of the car. I stared out the window at the city lights beginning to flicker on against the darkening sky, my mind replaying every conversation I had ever had with Priya, searching desperately for some sign, some detail I might have missed, that could explain how someone I trusted so completely might have been complicit in nearly getting me killed. We arrived at a nondescript building several blocks from the main office, one I had never noticed before despite walking past similar streets countless times. Elliot led us inside through a side entrance, down a quiet hallway, toward a room where I could already see Priya waiting through the narrow window in the door, her posture tense, her hands twisting together in her lap in a way that told me, even before we entered, that something was deeply wrong. Dante placed a steadying hand at the small of my back as we approached the door, and I found myself grateful for the gesture, for the quiet reminder that I was not walking into this alone, that whatever truth waited on the other side of that door, I would not have to face it without someone beside me who had already proven, in the most dangerous way possible, that he was willing to stand between me and anything that threatened to hurt me. I took a steadying breath, and together, we opened the door. Priya's eyes widened the moment she saw me, relief and confusion crossing her face in quick succession. "Nadia, thank goodness," she said, half rising from her chair. "I heard something happened last night. Are you all right? Nobody would tell me anything." Her reaction did not look like guilt. It looked like genuine concern. The same warmth I had known from her for over a year of working alongside each other, and I felt a small, cautious hope rise in my chest that Elliot's earlier warning about stolen or compromised credentials might prove true after all. "Sit down, Priya," Dante said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that left no room for argument. "We need to ask you some questions." Priya sat slowly, her eyes flicking between Dante and Elliot with growing unease, though I noticed she did not look away, did not display the shifting, evasive body language I might have expected from someone hiding something significant. "What kind of questions?" she asked. Elliot stepped forward, setting a tablet on the table between them, displaying the access logs he had gathered earlier that day. "Your credentials were used to access Nadia's calendar remotely 3 times over the past 2 weeks," he said. "Each time from a location outside the office network. Can you explain that?" Priya's confusion deepened into something closer to alarm as she studied the screen, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the tablet to look more closely. "I didn't do this," she said, her voice rising with genuine distress. "I swear to you, I didn't do this. I don't even know how to access someone else's calendar remotely. I barely know how to update my own password without calling technical support." I watched her carefully, searching for any sign of deception, but everything about her reaction felt authentic, raw, in a way that was difficult to fake convincingly under this kind of pressure. "When did you last change your password?" Elliot asked. Priya's brow furrowed as she thought back. "Months ago," she admitted. I know I'm supposed to change it regularly, but I always forget until the system forces me to. Elliot exchanged a glance with Dante, something unspoken passing between them. That's a significant vulnerability, he said. If someone gained access to her computer even briefly, they could have captured her credentials without her ever realizing it. Priya's eyes filled with tears, though her voice remained steady, insistent. I would never do anything to hurt you, Nadia, she said, turning to look at me directly. You have to believe me. You're one of the only people in that office who's ever actually been kind to me. I believed her. I could not explain exactly how I knew, only that something in her voice, in the desperate honesty of her expression, felt entirely different from the calculated calm of the men who had cornered me in the garage the night before. I believe you, I said quietly, and I watched relief wash visibly across her face. But Dante remained cautious, his expression giving nothing away. If your credentials were compromised, someone had to have physical or digital access to your computer, he said. Think carefully. Has anyone borrowed your laptop recently? Has anyone had unsupervised access to your desk, even briefly? Priya's face went pale as a memory seemed to surface behind her eyes. Marco? She said slowly. Marco from accounting. He asked to use my computer 2 weeks ago. Said his own had crashed and he needed to send an urgent email before a deadline. I didn't think anything of it. He's always seemed so harmless. The name landed in the room with quiet weight, and I found myself thinking back to that morning in the elevator, the same morning everything had begun to unravel. Marco forcing the doors open with his folder clutched to his chest, breathless and apologetic. I had thought nothing of it at the time, dismissed it as simple clumsiness, the ordinary chaos of an office morning. Marco Whitfield, Elliot said, already tapping through records on his tablet, junior accountant. Started 8 months ago. His employment records look clean, but that doesn't mean much if he was recruited specifically for this. Dante's expression hardened further, the warmth I had seen from him at the fireplace the night before, entirely gone now, replaced by the focused, dangerous calm of a man calculating his next move with precision. Where is he right now? He asked. Elliot checked something on his tablet before answering. Still at the office, according to the building's access logs. Working late, apparently. Dante turned to Priya, his voice gentling slightly, though the tension in the room remained thick. Thank you for your honesty, he said. You're not in any trouble. I need you to go home tonight and say nothing about this conversation to anyone. Understood. Priya nodded quickly, gathering her things with shaking hands, and before she left, she reached out and squeezed my arm gently, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. I'm so glad you're safe, she whispered, and then she was gone, leaving the three of us alone in the quiet room with a new name and a new direction. Marco, I said slowly, still struggling to reconcile the image of the nervous, apologetic young man from the elevator with someone capable of selling my safety to men who wanted to hurt me. He seemed so ordinary, so harmless. That's usually the point, Dante said grimly. The most effective infiltrators are the ones nobody suspects. Someone recruited him, trained him to blend in, to seem forgettable. Whoever is behind this understood exactly how to place someone close to you without raising any alarms. I felt a fresh wave of anger rising beneath the fear, sharper and more focused than anything I had felt in the garage the night before. There, my fear had been for my own survival. Here, it was something else entirely. A fierce, protective fury at the idea that someone had studied my life carefully enough to weaponize even the small, ordinary kindnesses of office friendships. I want to be there when you confront him, I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath it. Dante studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing every instinct to keep me safely away against the respect he had already shown for my judgment throughout the day. Finally, he nodded. You'll be there, he said, but you stay behind me. If he's dangerous, if he's armed, I need you protected immediately. I understand, I said, and this time I meant it without any hesitation, trusting the same instincts that had already proven themselves capable of protecting me once already. We moved through the building quietly, Elliot leading with 2 additional security personnel trailing behind, their movements practiced and silent, in a way that told me this was far from the first time they had conducted an operation like this. The office, usually so full of life and noise during the day, felt strange and hollow in the evening quiet, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting long shadows across empty desks. We found Marco exactly where the access logs indicated, hunched over his desk in the accounting department, his laptop screen the only light in the darkened section of the office. He looked up as we approached, and I watched every trace of color drain from his face the moment he saw the group surrounding him, understanding immediately, without a single word being spoken, that he had been discovered. "I don't know what you think I did," he began, his voice already trembling, but Dante raised a hand, silencing him before he could finish the sentence. "Don't waste time lying," Dante said, his voice carrying a quiet, controlled menace that made even Elliot straighten slightly beside him. "We know about Priya's credentials. We know you've been feeding information to Victor Kessler. What we don't know yet is how deep this goes, and whether you're going to make this easy or difficult for yourself." Marco's composure crumbled entirely, his hands shaking visibly against the surface of his desk. "I didn't have a choice," he said, his voice cracking. "They came to me months ago. They knew things about my family, about debts I owed, things I never told anyone here. They said if I didn't help them, they'd make sure my sister lost her job, that they'd make things difficult for people I love. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I swear I never wanted that." I watched him carefully, and despite everything, despite the danger his information had placed me in, I found myself feeling something unexpected, a flicker of understanding for a young man who had been caught between impossible choices, manipulated, and threatened until his own survival had become tangled with the safety of people he cared about most. Dante's expression did not soften, though his voice, when he spoke again, carried something slightly less sharp than before. "Who exactly approached you?" he asked. "I need names, dates, everything you remember." Marco spoke quickly then, the words tumbling out of him in a rush of relief and fear, describing a man he had met outside a coffee shop near his apartment 3 months earlier, a man who had known details about his life that should have been impossible for a stranger to know, who had offered him money at first before shifting quickly into threats when the money alone had not been enough to secure his cooperation. As Marco spoke, Elliot recorded every detail, cross-referencing names and locations against information they had already gathered about Victor Kessler's operation, slowly building a clearer picture of how deeply the infiltration had reached and how carefully it had been planned. The coffee shop Marco described matched a location Elliot had already flagged earlier that day, a small storefront 2 blocks from an address linked to one of Victor's known associates, and with each new detail, the outline of the operation grew sharper, less like a random act of intimidation and more like a carefully constructed plan months in the making. I listened as Marco described the exact wording of the threats made against his sister, the specific details about her workplace that the stranger had recited to him with unsettling precision, proof that whoever orchestrated this had invested real time and resources into understanding, not just my life, but the lives of anyone who might be leveraged into helping them reach me. It was a chilling realization, understanding how patient and calculating Victor Kessler had been, willing to wait months, to manipulate an innocent young man's fear for his family, all to place a single set of eyes close enough to track my movements. "You did the right thing telling us the truth," I found myself saying to Marco, surprising myself with the steadiness in my own voice. "I know you were scared. I know you felt like you didn't have another option, but you have one now, and you're taking it." Marco looked up at me with an expression of raw gratitude that made something in my chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I never wanted any of this. I just didn't know what else to do." "I understand more than you might think," I told him gently. "Being underestimated, being placed in situations where the people around you assume they know exactly what you're capable of and what choices you'll make. Sometimes surviving means making decisions you're not proud of. What matters now is what you choose next." When Marco finally finished, exhausted and visibly relieved to have the truth finally out in the open, Dante studied him for a long, silent moment before speaking again. "You're going to help us now," he said. "Not because you owe me anything, but because it's the only way to make sure your family stays safe from the people who threatened you in the first place. Elliot will explain what we need from you." Marco nodded quickly, gratitude and fear mixing openly across his face, and as Elliot led him toward a private room to begin outlining the next steps, I found myself standing alone with Dante, in the quiet, empty office, the same office where I had spent countless ordinary mornings, never once suspecting the danger quietly gathering around the edges of my daily routine. "It's over," I said quietly, though even as I said it, I understood it was not entirely true. Victor Kessler was still out there, still angry, still determined to send whatever message he had originally intended. But something essential had shifted tonight, a crucial piece of his plan exposed and turned against him, and I felt, for the first time since the garage, a genuine sense that we had regained some measure of control. Dante turned to face me fully, the harsh fluorescent light of the office doing nothing to diminish the warmth that had returned to his expression now that the immediate danger had passed. "Not entirely over," he admitted, "but we have what we need now to move against Victor directly, instead of simply reacting to whatever he throws at us next." I studied his face for a long moment, thinking back over the impossible span of the last day, from the ordinary quiet of my morning tea, to the terror of the garage, to the raw honesty of the fireside conversation, to this moment, standing beside him in an empty office that had once felt so safely familiar. "I'm not going anywhere," I said finally, answering a question he had not asked, but had clearly been waiting to hear answered regardless. "Whatever comes next with Victor Kessler, whatever this world of yours continues to demand, I want to face it standing beside you, not tucked safely away somewhere, while you handle it alone." Dante closed the distance between us slowly, his hand rising to gently cup my face, his thumb brushing softly against my cheek in a gesture that carried none of the violence I had witnessed him deliver in the garage, only tenderness, only the quiet relief of a man who had nearly lost something he had only just begun to allow himself to want. "I don't deserve someone like you," he said quietly, "someone strong enough to walk into all of this with open eyes and still choose to stay." I leaned into his touch, feeling, for the first time since this entire ordeal had begun, something that felt remarkably like hope. "Maybe I'm exactly the kind of person this world needs," I said softly. "Someone who isn't afraid to be underestimated, because I already know exactly what I'm capable of when it matters most." Outside, the city continued its restless nighttime rhythm, unaware of everything that had unfolded within these walls, unaware that a war was quietly beginning between two powerful men over docks and pride and territory. But inside that empty office, standing together in the aftermath of danger and discovery, I understood that whatever challenges Victor Kessler still intended to bring, I would not face them as a bystander protected from the truth any longer. I would face them standing beside Dante, equal in courage if not in experience, ready to prove that being underestimated had only ever been a weapon others used against me, never a reflection of what I was truly capable of becoming when everything I loved was finally on the line. And as Dante's arms wrapped around me fully for the first time, steady and certain, in a way that promised more than mere protection, I understood that this was not the end of the danger we now faced together. It was only the beginning of everything we would become because of it.